Hey everyone, it's me, Hashi, also known as Action Movie Dad on Twitter, and today I'd love to show you a cool little combination of effects using After Effects and Cinema 4D to make the invisible jet from Wonder Woman 1984. And no reason to not just get started. Alright, so for those of you who know me, I am much more comfortable in After Effects. I've been an After Effects artist for many years, but even though I've been using Cinema for the last decade or so, I still consider myself in the learning category. But hopefully I will show you a couple of things that I like to do that are very simple for me, an After Effects user, to use Cinema for. One of the resources I often use for finding 3D models is Sketchfab. Sketchfab.com is a community and a big collection of awesome 3D models. Some of them are available via Marketplace, and some of them are these awesome scans that are downloadable with just a simple Creative Commons attribution required. So it's a great place to start for someone who would like a bunch of 3D resources but doesn't have them to begin with. So one of the cool things about Sketchfab is how well it integrates into Cinema 4D. In fact, there's this Sketchfab Importer that you can download right on Sketchfab, just searching for Sketchfab Importer for Cinema 4D, and I have that installed right now. So what's really great is for this project, I could just go to this extension, the Sketchfab Importer, and it starts out by having you connect to your Sketchfab account, which I'm now connected as Hashi. And now I can search for a model that we could use today. So I could search for fighter jet. And we've got a mosquito in amber. Oh, and that's because I have staff pick checked here. That kind of curates these to some of the best models available on there, but I'm going to uncheck that because there are a lot of great other models available as well. So this one in particular I like is this fighter jet knee by Neil Nye 1997. It has a really similar look to the jet that I want to use today. And watch this, I can just click import model right here. And as I do, this extension works in the background, and depending on your internet speed, downloads and imports this model directly into Cinema for you. So here we go. I got this beautiful jet. So wonderful, very simple, and this is the jet we're going to use today. Now, while Cinema would be an excellent place to animate a fighter jet, as I said earlier, I'm very much an After Effects person. And coming from Red Giant, that is now merged with Maxon, I am a big fan of one of their tools which allows me to bring in 3D models, and that is an effect called Mirror. The way Mirror works is you add a solid to After Effects, and then you add the effect Mirror, which is under Red Giant, Trap Code, Mirror 3 now. All right, now when Mirror 3 loads up, you get this simple plane. It's all crinkled up and kind of looks like this. I'm going to quickly add a camera to my composition. That's Control-Alt-Shift or Control-Alt-Option-C to add a camera. And what's cool about this plugin is Mirror, even though it's on a flat solid, appears and reacts to the 3D camera, just like that. So Mirror can do more than just this plane here. You can also select 3D models. Now, back in Cinema, I can make sure that I save this model. It came into this Untitled comp, so let me save that really quickly as the new jet. I've done this once before. So we'll save this as a new jet, which means that Mirror can choose that Cinema 4D model as a model to add. Now, before I do that just yet, I want to show you a cool way to optimize models for a plugin like Mirror. Now, obviously in Cinema we have all of these different cool, very nested, lots of bits with different pieces, multiple textures and things like that. And to bring it into Mirror, I really want this model more optimized. And I found that the simplest way to do that is with a connect object. So I'll come up here, I'll grab a connect object, and I'll drag my fighter jet right into it. I'll click on the connect object, and I'm going to uncheck weld. Weld is kind of what did all these weird things to it right there. Uncheck that, and now we've got just our perfect little model there. And now I can basically select the connect object and press C or press the make editable button over here. And look at that. Now I've got one piece of geometry with, you know, a bunch of polygon tags and texture tags. Now to simplify this even more, I'll just drag it out of there for now. I just want this object and then say object, bake object. And now I have the option to say, I want to keep a single texture. I want to replace this object. And I can set the dimensions of my desired new texture that I'm creating. And I'm just going to do something kind of like 2K, kind of small for now, because I don't really need this texture, but I'd love to show you how this works because it's kind of fun. So let me designate a path for this texture, and then I'll say bake. And as it bakes, it really quickly throws together this unique single texture. And if I close my bake object now, you can see that if I come down to my materials, I can say, let's delete the unused materials, and you'll see that I just have the one texture now. And that's a really great way to optimize a model down into one piece. I could, in the viewport, just switch that over to not have any scaling, so I can see that it came over just great. And unless I plan to monkey with them later, I don't even need these polygon selections anymore. So I'm just going to select and delete all those. And now I've got a very simplified new Jet Cinema file, and I'll just save that like this. And I love it because now I just have one simple mesh, one simple texture. That really helps if I want to use Mirror as my 3D interface. So let's minimize this now. Come back into Mirror where I'm clicking on Add New Model, and we're going to go ahead and select that new jet that we just built. I'll say New Jet. And Mirror works perfectly with these Cinema 4D files now. It came in as the new jet object. I'll say OK, and bam, we've got this cool white jet right here. Now you'll see that the C4D file also came into this comp down here as a hidden layer back there using Cineware. And back here on our Mirror 3 layer, under Geometry, I can go down to 3D Model Settings and then say Create Null. And that creates a nice 3D null that I can now use as a handle for this 3D object right here. Now, when Mirror starts out, it has this default kind of white texture with a little bit of ambient occlusion. But if you wanted to, you could go over here and import that fighter jet texture that we just created, drag it down here as its own layer within the comp, which I can now hide. And then within Mirror itself, I'll find my solid and go to Mirror. I can go down to Texture, and then I can select any texture map I like. And look at this, it textured up that jet, which is great. Let me scale this up a little bit within this comp. It's kind of small. There we go. So if you are an After Effects artist that works a little bit with Cinema, this is a great way to be able to bring in a Cinema model that's going to interact really natively with how you're used to controlling After Effects. Mirror also allows me to do some things like add in some new lights, and I can monkey with the shininess and appearance of this jet all I want. But for this example that I want to show you today, I'm actually interested in showing you how you can use a 3D mirror object as a really pretty displacement map for a background texture. That's basically what this invisible jet looked like in the new Wonder Woman 1984 movie. So back in my mirror model, I'm actually going to tell it to not have a texture, just to go with this default white. Here under the shader properties, I have some control over how intense the ambient occlusion is, and I'm going to turn that up a bit. just because that'll give me some more definition to parts of this jet. Maybe I'll bloat out the radius of the AO a little bit to something like this. And right here we have something that will work very well as a displacement map with another really fun Red Giant product. So to see a displacement map in action, I'm going to need to bring in a background. And one of the resources I use to grab backgrounds all the time is pxhere.com. What's great about this is it's a bunch of royalty-free images. A lot of them don't even require Creative Commons attribution. So again, if you're starting out and don't have a lot of resources, this is a great place to start. I simply do something like I'll search for a nighttime city, and then I can get a bunch of really cool options within here. And you'll see that they are free for personal and commercial use, no attribution required, which is great. And I like the look of this one, so I'm going to go ahead and save this file for our use today. Back in After Effects, let's go ahead and import that new image just so I can use it as a background image. Lovely. Maybe I'll fit it to right here. And now I'm going to add an adjustment layer, and I'm going to add the effect Chromatic Displacement. So that is under the Red Giant VFX suite called Chromatic Displacement. And I'm going to use this mirror layer as the displacement layer itself. So for that, let's just rename this really quickly here so I remember what it is. This is the mirror jet. I'm going to hide this. I'm going to rename this my adjustment displacement map right there. And now watch this. In Chromatic Displacement, I can select my mirror jet layer, being sure to select Effects and Masks. And now Chromatic Displacement will use that mirror layer for displacement. So as I turn up the displacement amount, look at this. I get this pretty displaced jet that is displacing everything behind it. And if I grab my 3D controller null, you can see I can rotate all around this beautiful glassy looking object. And I love being able to control this 3D object right here within After Effects and getting such a pretty result. And really this is just this horizon pretty image behind, and this mirror layer, I can turn that back on just so we can remind everyone what it looked like this, displacing the background. Now, Chromatic Displacement has a bunch of standard displacement kind of settings where I can, soften or unsoften the displacement map. If I soften it up a lot, I can get this really cool blobby lens effect. And I just think it's a really pretty type of displacement. It also spreads the chroma out a little bit. So if I turn that up, you can see that I'm getting some true chromatic, prismatic edges to some of these things, which you could also, turn all the way off and just use the original colors if you want. But I love the way that looks. It makes it very crystalline or whatever to me. So I'm going to unsoften this a bit. So I just have this slight, predator level displacement, and I'm going to turn down the displacement amount to a very subtle level. Maybe I'll turn the softness up a little bit more. Something like this. Now, one of the things I like about a subtle displacement is that while you're moving it around, it can be really clear where this invisible jet is, which is sort of what they do in the movie. But, if you have it aligned and just holding still for a little while with no real indicators, it's pretty invisible, which is kind of cool. You have to know that you're looking for that jet. So this is the way chromatic displacement works. It's my favorite way to displace things in After Effects. And it can work really well even in conjunction with something like mirror being visible, where I could turn the mirror layer into something like a soft light filter. And now I have this kind of render of these highlights, and I also have this displacement that looks a little bit like some refraction going on. So it's a really unique tool that you could combine in a couple of different ways if you were in here. But now that we understand the basics of what chromatic displacement is doing and how Mirror is utilizing this 3D model, let's jump to the new task of creating a whole 3D exciting scene from scratch. Now, as I said, I love grabbing images from PX here to sample for my shots, and I'm going to open up one of them here into After Effects, and I'll just create a comp from that image really quickly. And it's nothing exciting, just a nice high altitude image of this city and some ground. But I'm going to utilize this in a pretty unique way. To use this, I am going to apply an effect in After Effects under Distort called CC Power Pin. And once I've applied the effect, I'm then going to disable it over here in the Effects window. And now, just by sight, I'm going to drag 4 corners of this power pin to kind of align with an area that I would consider, you know, a perspective square on the ground here. So I'll just, you know, using some of the cues within the image, I'm just going to do that and line up this nice big rectangle like this. I'm going to come up to my effect, which I disabled, and I'm going to check Unstretch. And now if I turn the effect back on, you'll see that basically Power Pin has reverse projected this little rectangle here to fill the whole frame like this. Now this is kind of a ridiculous, wonky looking thing. Obviously it's supposed to be at an angle, but I am actually going to utilize this as a tileable ground card within After Effects to create my 3D scene. So I'm going to press Control-Alt-S to save this frame, or Control-Option-S if you're on a Mac. And let's export this as a JPEG that I'll call City Swatch. All right, let's render that. Okay, and now I'm going to jump over to Adobe Photoshop, where this next part is a little bit easier. So let's open up that City Swatch we just exported. Now, when I exported this, I wasn't really paying attention to how big this thing would end up. So let me just quickly start by going to the image size. And yeah, that's humongous. So let me try scaling this down, maybe to something like 1024. Let's see how big that makes it. Lovely. That's a much more manageable size for a tileable swatch. Now, luckily, there's actually not a whole lot of definition. There's a lot of really dark areas in this image, which would make it pretty tileable. But I am still going to use one of the age-old tile tricks, which is to go to Filter, Other, and then Offset. And here in Offset, what you can do is it's default set to wrap pixels around. So as I slide something over, you can see that I'm sliding over the seam of the image right to the middle here. You can kind of tell the seam is right around here. And I can also scroll the vertical seam onto screen somewhere. So you can see that seam is right across here. So now that I have these two kind of visible areas that you can see the seam in, I'm going to go to my rectangular selection. I'm going to select that area kind of right here. And I'm going to shift select this seam right here, so I have this little X carved out. And then I can go to Edit, Content Aware Fill. And Content Aware Fill is going to try to fill in this seamy area with whatever it guesses would go there. So I'm just going to say Apply with the default settings, deselect this, and now this image doesn't have that seam anymore. You can see the seams there. When I turn this on, the seam is gone. And that's lovely. It has this nice kind of a street running along this direction, and I'd actually like to have a street running in both directions. So I'm going to flatten this image out. I'm going to select this kind of like implied street, and I'm going to just copy and paste that, and I'm going to make a copy like this. Like this is the most ridiculous way you could do it, but it works. I want to match the weird ortho angle of this also. I'm going to hold Shift and reverse the street like that, so it's kind of matching those. And I'll place it maybe right here, and maybe I'll turn the mode of this to Add. That way it'll add in those lights that look like a street running left and right, and I'll erase the two sides that are kind of appearing here. Oh, it's a perfect brush right there. Just erase that a little bit, erase this a little bit, And now I'm going to save this one more time. Let's flatten it out and then save that as my city swatch. Now I will hop back over to After Effects where I can load up that image we just exported right here. And I'm going to create a new composition. We'll go with HD, maybe 24 frames per second. 10 seconds is fine. I'll say OK. And then I will bring in that city swatch right here. I'll set it down, and then I can turn it into a 3D layer by checking my 3D switch right there and just rotating it flat like that. Then, just like before, I'll press Control-Alt-Shift-C to create a new camera, or Control-Alt-Option-C. And now I have a camera that I can move around in After Effects, so I can move it up to a kind of similar angle that I extracted the projection from. And you can see when I do that, then everything kind of looks a little bit more square to the ground, which is great. Now on my layer itself, I can add the effect. I believe it is Stylize CC Reptile. This will repeat this image like a tile. Repeat it right there. I can expand it to the right, expand it to the left, and also expand it up and down. And look at this. I've now created a beautiful 3D city perspective ground plane. And obviously you all know that this is just a projected repeating pattern, but from this angle it's a pretty decent thing. The only thing that I think is a little bit too distinct is this collection of buildings right here. It's too obvious. So let's go over into the swatch and just maybe clone stamp it out. There we go. And save that. And now if I jump back into After Effects, it should be updated. And now there isn't a super obvious repeating thing. We've got these nice, very uniform city streets. I'm actually going to find a slightly higher angle so this looks a little bit more like you're looking down on the city. I just don't want to go too far because I don't want it to make it obvious that it's this projected card. I just want to kind of stick in this safe realm, which is sort of, I would say, from, you know, here to here and kind of moving around like that. So let's find an angle about like this. And once I'm happy with this placement, I am going to add a little dolly for my camera. And the way I'll do that is just like in cinema or something, you can create a null object that your camera is attached to. And as long as that is a 3D object, I could move this directly along the X axis and I'll get this perfectly linear along the X axis transform. So to start out, let's throw this maybe way back here somewhere. Just before that card becomes invisible again, and I'll set a keyframe right here, and then I'll go to the end of my comp. You know what? Let's make this comp 5 seconds because who has the time? Let's trim that to the comp area. I'll go to the 5-second mark, and we'll just crank up the X value so the jet is flying right along this city all the way up to about there where the tiling stops. Now if I play that back, look at that. We've got a beautiful city. They're flying over it at super speed. It's actually too much super speed. Let's just tone that down to about here, and we'll play that back. And that feels feasible to me. I'll turn on its motion blur, this city layer, so we get a little bit more motion blur in there, and that'll look a little bit more natural as it comes through. And now I want a couple of extra layers for parallax to make this very boring looking thing look a little bit more interesting. So I would love to add some layers of clouds. And After Effects is actually pretty good at creating pretend clouds. The way I'll do that is I'll create a new composition. I'll make it a little bit bigger this time. Let's make it like 3000 by 1500 big. And we'll call that clouds. And now in here, I'm going to create 2 solids. Let's create this solid, and I'll just go ahead and duplicate it. Now on this top solid, I'm going to add Fractal Noise. That's under Effects, Noise and Grain, Fractal Noise. Now, I'm sure you've all used fractals before, but I love them because they're a great way to generate organic things in Cinema or in After Effects. So I'm going to start by trying to create a cloud pattern by increasing the contrast a little bit, maybe turning down the brightness so it's a little bit more sparse clouds, something kind of like this. Those solid chunks of white will be more solid clouds and they'll fall off at the edges here. Turn up the complexity just a little bit so we have some more definition in the edges there. And then to knock this off of being such a uniform looking fractal noise, I'm going to add distort, turbulent displace, and look, right away, just even the default setting made this a lot more artistic. Added some of these swirls and stuff. So let's turn up the size of these swirls and maybe the amount of them a little bit. So yeah, we're getting some more just kind of windswept cloud pattern kind of things in here. So I don't know, something around here I really like. All right, so now I'm going to turn off this solid we just created. And now I'm going to go to my second solid, and I'm also going to add some fractal noise to it. So noise grain, fractal noise. And in here, I'm just going to kind of turn this to a low contrast, kind of bright, kind of milky, cloudy pattern like this. And now that I've created these two layers, this and this, I am going to use this top layer as a Luma matte for this cloud texture. So let me really quickly rename these. So I'll call this like cloud matte, and I'll call this the cloud texture. No consistency in my naming conventions. We'll go ahead and press F4, or you can click on toggles and switches. So you can use this pull down right here to set this top one as a Luma matte. And now you can see that this alpha of these clouds above will basically be applied to this texture that I create down here. So if I turn down the darkness of the clouds here, I can have dark clouds or whatever. I'm going to stick with kind of bright ones for now. And we'll go with something like that. And now also you can see here's the alpha of this layer too. So there's some cool dark spots, some cool bright spots, but we got basically clouds over alpha, which is really nice. All created in After Effects procedurally. Let's go back into our city comp and we'll bring in those clouds just like we did the city layer. I'll turn it to 3D and lay it down flat. I'll grab the X rotation dial right here, hold down Shift, and then it'll snap right to 90 degrees like that. And now I can also use the Z gizmo to pull it up off the ground a little bit like that. And let's go ahead and scale that to fill frame. And look at this, we got clouds right over our city. We'll turn on their motion blur swatch and watch when I press play. Look, now we've got a beautiful little parallax thing going on. And you know what's better than one layer of parallax is two layers of parallax. So let's go ahead and duplicate these clouds one more time. Pull them up even closer to the camera, somewhere like here. We'll offset them just a little bit so you can see that same pattern there. Yeah, there we go. All right, now let's play this back. And ooh, look at that. You got your very own Peter Pan style shot. The best thing about these procedural clouds is that anytime I want, I can go over to the clouds layer right here and adjust the matte layer of the fractal noise. And if I turn up the brightness, I'll get more full cloud coverage. So if I jump back to my city, look at this. Now it's totally covered with clouds like that. I'm disabling the motion blur for a second just to preview this a little quicker for us. But yeah, there we go. Look, more full clouds, cloudy night. In fact, I want somewhere in the middle right here. Let's just go back to 0, I guess. Yeah, that looks nice and appropriately cloudy. But I know what you're thinking. This also looks like hot garbage. It doesn't look very good right now. But the reason why I wanted to set this up was to show you how simple it is to create these three layers. We got our city in the background there. We've got a background layer of clouds, foreground layer of clouds. But now I'm going to combine all of these layers with one of my very favorite tools in the Red Giant toolkit, and that is called Red Giant Super Comp.
Creating complex integrated composites in Adobe After Effects can be a difficult, time-consuming task, but not anymore. With Red Giant SuperComp, light and atmospheric effects interact with all of your layers and the elements of a scene in a far more natural way, and with far less...
And man, do I love the guy that we used to have do the voiceovers for these commercials. Good guy. Good VO artist. Now, some of you have heard of or even used SuperComp before, and it is a lovely, lovely treat, especially for a shot like this. Now, because of the way After Effects is built, it's actually rendering its 3D layers after it deals with its 2D layers. So one thing that I'm going to do before we jump into SuperComp is I'm going to grab each of these layers and press Pre-Compose, move all attributes to a new composition, like that, say OK, and then turn on the Collapse Transformations button. Basically, that makes it a 3D layer that is still reacting to my camera just fine, but it's also disguised as a 2D layer. See that? So I'm going to go ahead and continue that with both of these other two layers, Pre-Compose and Collapse, Pre-Compose, great, and Collapse. And maybe I'll rename these Background Clouds and Foreground Clouds. All right, and now to use SuperComp, I can just select these three layers, right-click, and say Effect, Red Giant VFX, SuperComp. Now, SuperComp opens up its own standalone panel that you can dock right into After Effects if you like. That's how I usually work with it. And the cool thing about SuperComp, as you sort of saw in that video, is that all of these layers are going to be aware of what's directly behind them. So, for example, these background clouds, which look very silly right now, I can add some cool effects. In fact, any of these effects to this layer, just like this, by clicking on this Radial menu. I'm going to select Haze, because Haze helps blend the background colors all around in front of the layer's colors, just like this. And look at that. Look how much more natural these clouds immediately look composited over that city. I'm also going to add the blur behind effect. And as I turn this effect up, and maybe affect its size a little bit like that, these little city lights that are behind the clouds are getting blurred, just the way they would in real life in this situation. I might even turn that up more. I'll even turn up the haze a little bit more. Look, I'm going for broke with the clouds here. Look at that. And another effect that might look great on these is some diffusion. If I turn up some diffusion, I can get these clouds to look a little bit more misty. I'll turn up the size of the diffusion like that so you can sort of see them scattering in some light from behind them like that. That's maybe too much there. I've turned all the way up, but I'll turn this back down. So you get the idea. It took this layer that looked like this before and turned it into this. Let me show that up a little bit more closely. So this layer looks like garbage turns into this super competent looking piece. Now I'm going to right click on the layer right here and I'm going to say copy all effects, and then I'm going to click on this layer and say paste all effects. Now when I enable my foreground clouds, you'll see that they are compositing with those same cool types of haze and whatnot. I can actually click on the haze amount here and maybe turn it down a little bit for these top clouds, just imagining that they have a little bit less of the city light on them, but you still get some nice color wrap from down there. And let's go ahead and close this panel for now and just take a look at what our composite looks like now. And look at this. So much better, right? And the way SuperComp is brought into this composite is a new solid is created right at the top called SuperComp, and the effect is entirely nested within this one layer now. So if I solo this layer, you'll see that's the only layer playing anything, even though there are layers down behind it. Now the neat thing about Super Comp is that I can go down to something like my background layer, and I could still grab it and move it around, and you can see that as I move it, the clouds and the light behind them changes the way it's interacting. So if I've got nothing, we got these boring gray clouds, but as I bring this layer back in, you have color behind it. And that's what's really fun about working in this environment, is all the changes you make to these layers below get propagated properly throughout the rest of the comp. And now you could go, turn this into a looping piece with some sound effects and sell it on the crypto art market. And then, offset your carbon footprint with the proceeds you make from the sale. But hey, I thought we were creating an invisible jet scene. And yes, we're still going to do that as well. And now that we have this lovely background piece for it, let's go ahead and, oh gosh, let's save, first of all. My goodness, save. Geez, that was close. All right, okay, we're safe. We're safe. All right, we're gonna do just what we did before here in our first comp with this jet. And in fact, I'm gonna repeat the steps just because why not? Let's rename this thing the jet shot. We'll move it over here just so it's a little easier to remember. All right, so let's add a new solid, and we'll call this thing mirror. And now I'm going to apply trap code mirror, and under geometry, we'll choose a model, and down here at the bottom, we'll already have in our library that new jet we just created. We'll say OK. And we don't see anything because I think that the comp center is actually way over here somewhere. Ah, there we go, way over here. So let's go to our mirror layer and 3D model settings and create a 3D null for it. All right, there we go. There's our 3D null. Now it's way down on the floor here somewhere. So I'm going to move my jet up higher kind of where these clouds are. And I'm going to use this to rotate it facing that way. And let's scroll back to the beginning here and try to position our jet somewhere in frame. Like, look how handy it is to just have this null right here to position everything. And in fact, let's move it up a little bit closer to the camera and scale it down, because I think that it's not nearly as high as those cloud layers were. Let's go with about this big in frame. And watch this. I can position my jet right here on frame 1, set a keyframe, jump to the very end, and just crank up its X value, and that should move it right along this same path as the camera. And that's the reason I originally parented the camera to this, camera null, which I'll maybe rename Dolly or something like that, just so we remember that's where the camera motion is coming from. It's perfectly along the X axis. And now that we have our stand-in jet, we could even make this more interesting by adding some other keyframes to this camera that's attached to the jet. Let's add some keyframes to its position and point of interest, and then by the end here, let's have the camera be maybe tilting. Let's have the camera change its position a little bit like that. And also let's add some Z rotation keyframes. So by the end, maybe the camera's kind of twirling around or something like that, or maybe clockwise. Yeah, let's go that way. Do some wacky stuff with this camera. Since it's all on that X axis, what's really cool is it's going to feel like it's following this jet perfectly, even though it's really a trick of just it following along the X path. I explained that really well, everyone, but let's preview this right now. So as I scrub through that, I can kind of see the position of my jet throughout this shot, which is pretty cool. I'm going to get the camera even higher by the end here. So it's like we're rotating around to a really high position or something like that. Just wacky, just having some fun. All right, let's see. Yeah, that's great. And then this can maybe even start out closer to the jet and a little bit lower. There we go. Now it comes up and out, and the jet gets farther away. That looks neat. Let's add some roll keyframes to the jet too. So we'll do that all on this null with the jet here. Let's add some rotation to its, is that Z, right? Yeah, okay. Ooh, it looks like it's rotating from just above the body of the jet. Is that going to look weird? Let's see. I'll go to the anchor point, adjust the Y, and we're golden. All right, let's go back to the rotation. Let's start it out at 0 rotation, and then we'll have it do a cool like spin, you know, for no reason, just like that. We'll have it overcompensate a little bit, rotating all the way to a little bit past 1, and then we'll have it settle back to, you know, right around flat again. Just a couple little keyframes like that. Let's select them all and press F9 to make them kind of smoother keyframes. Look at our little graph, see how that feels. Yeah, I think that's going to work out nicely. Now we have a few little animation rotation keyframes on this jet, which is delightful. Right, to add a little bit more definition to this jet, I'm going to do what we did in our earlier example, where I go into the mirror layer and then scroll down to the shader properties, where I can tell it to have some increased ambient occlusion, just to give me a little bit more shape. And let me spread that out and turn up the intensity a bit. All right, something like that I think will be perfect for my purposes. And now that we've got our jet in place, I would love to add some contrails coming off of the jet, because I feel like the contrails will be visible even if the jet isn't in the final comp. And to do that, we're going to simply add a new solid. I'll call it particular. And I'm going to let you guess what effect I'm going to add to this. Some of you are ahead of me. That's right, we're adding trapcode particular to this. And we're not just going to use particular the standard old way, we're going to use some light emitters in here. So I'm going to create a new light. I'm going to make it a point light, and I'm going to rename it, importantly, emitter 1, just like that. And I'm going to say OK. And now immediately everything in the comp went scawampus, and that's because there's a light in here. Ultimately, I will disable it so everything will look normal again. But since these are all 3D layers in After Effects, they're all getting affected by that light. So just bear with me for a second. We are going to go to this light right here, and we are going to parent it to our null controller for mirror. Once I've done that, I can press P to reveal its position and zero out these numbers, just like that. And now you can see we've got this thing parented right to this jet. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of scrub through my animation to try to guess where this light is positioned on the jet. Right now it's a little bit above center, and I'm going to scroll it down, and then I'm going to scrub back to here or so and try to move it out to the tip of the wing. About this far in, maybe that far back like that. And let me just play through. And now it looks basically like this light is sort of on the edge of the wing there. And if I duplicate one of these, I can reveal its position and select the negative version of the X placement. And now I should actually have a light on both wings like that. And now the reason we've done that is so we can use these both as particular emitters. So I'm going to turn off these lights so everything goes back to normal. And then in particular, I'm going to go to emitter, and instead of point, I'm going to select lights. And as soon as I do that, you'll see that I have particles emitting from the areas where these lights are. Now, by default, the emitter size is already too big. It's 500. I'm going to turn that all the way down to 0. And now, if I play through, you'll see that I have particles emitting from the two tips of my wing, really simply like that, creating these nice particle trails, just like that. And right now their velocity is turned up a bit. I actually don't want them to have very much velocity. Right now their velocity is turned up a bit. I actually don't want them to have very much velocity. Let's turn that down to a smaller number. Yeah, 11 kind of works. All right, and as I kind of scrub through, you can see these contrails that I have going on behind them. To improve the look a bit, let's find a fun frame like this. And we'll go to the particle settings. These particles, I'd probably like to use some cloudlet particles. I'd love to feather out their edges a little bit and bring their size down to maybe just a couple pixels big. Let's start with 1 and then have its size random be kind of higher. I'm going to have a few more particles per second emitted, so I have more of a smoky trail like that. And I'm also going to go to the opacity settings and tell these particles to have some random opacity. Now if I scroll down to the rendering settings, I can enable the motion blur under here, so let's turn that on. And now already that's hiding a bunch of stuff going on within these, but makes them a little bit more realistic, which is pretty cool. I realize I can probably increase my size random a little bit more just so I can get a little bit more chunkiness in there. And I'll turn the opacity of these contrails down just a little bit too. Let's start them at like that. All right, let's do a quick preview of this. And now check it out. That's beautiful. We've got this jet flying through the air, leaving some contrails behind it. Now, looking at this, I can tell that I didn't really guess the correct height of these clouds, and so the contrails are moving slower than the foreground clouds are moving back. An easy way to adjust that is in Trapcode Particular. I'm going to go to my fast physics setting, and I'm going to add some drift to these particles. Drift is very much like the old wind, but if I select, I believe, a negative value, it'll push these particles back with a bit of wind and extra speed. So yeah, looking at this, now I feel like these contrails are moving back quickly enough off the jet as it spins. But I love it. We created this really cool interactive system of lights that all I needed to do was parent them to my jet null, and they look great in the comp. Now, speaking of looking great in the comp, how do we turn these two layers into an invisible jet from Wonder Woman? Well, we're going to use Super Comp, just like before, to finish compositing the rest of this shot. Now, here's how it'll work. I'll go to my Super Comp layer, which is what we are working above right now, and I'm going to say Open Panel, and it'll open this little panel like before, and you'll see the original 3 layers that are being super comped right here. But you'll also see over here I have these other source layers, Particular and Mirror, which aren't appearing in the shot. So I can add both of these layers to Super Comp just by pressing these plus buttons. I'll press plus there and plus there. And now they are all appearing in this one Super Comp layer right at the top, like that. Now when you're compositing with Super Comp, there are multiple ways that the layer type can appear. Right now, this jet is set to a normal mode. It can also be an additive mode where it's being, added onto this like it was a fire element or something. And we also have displacement. If I use displacement, you'll see that it's actually using that Chromatic Displacement engine, the same one we were using here in this example when we were trying to, displace the background behind everything like that. It's the same engine as in here right now. Now I've got a lot of clouds and stuff behind it here, so I can still go to these displacement settings and do some similar stuff. Turn up the softening amount, turn up the amount. Now I can get a nice, soft, subtle displacement like that, but it's a little bit weird because the jet still isn't very visible against the background. And there's actually a cool trick that I have for that, which is, as I recall, I can monkey with any of these layers behind a super comp if I want. So I could go to the foreground clouds, which are disguised as a 2D layer, and add the effect Channel Set Matte. And what Set Matte does is it takes the matte from another layer and applies it to the alpha of this layer. So if I select Mirror, for example, and select Effects and Masks, first it'll do the opposite. It'll use the mirror layer to matte clouds, the foreground clouds, just to within the jet. But then I could also check Invert Matte. And now the shape of the mirror layer is being used to hold out these foreground clouds. So if you see just these layers by themselves, it's holding out that jet matte, which is really cool. So now when I hold out the jet matte like that, you can see as I play through, you get this cool effect that the jet is displacing stuff behind and also blocking out the clouds where it is. Now, in Super Comp, the layers don't necessarily match the order of the layers down here. So right now my mirror jet is up above the foreground clouds, but I can actually put it sandwiched between the two layers of clouds like this. So you won't see it affecting these top cloud layers, but you will see it distorting the clouds way down below it like this. You can see as I turn on and off the displacement effect that it's looking like that or like this. So pretty rad right there. And then for these particular contrails, I can do a little bit of work too. For the contrails, I'm going to actually press the plus button, and then instead of selecting individual effects, I'm just going to go to the left over here and say presets. And when I say presets, it'll open up this nice little bay of different layer presets. And you'll see as I hover over them up here in this window, it's previewing what these different presets look like. And like, for example, look at this crazy effect where it's creating these rays off of that. Now, obviously, we're not doing anything that extreme, but look how cool it was to just select this preset for this otherwise boring layer and have it do all of this automatically. I don't need anything this extreme. In fact, I just want something very light, maybe misty, a little bit like that. And in fact, I don't even need these to be this visible. I'm going to turn down their overall opacity, just so they're still there, but not so in your face. And now let's go ahead and take a preview of our shot now that we have our holdout matte and we have those contrails in place. One last thing I'll do actually for these contrails is, in particular, I can go to the global controls right here and adjust the pre-run, just add a second of pre-run to those contrails so they'll start out on screen instead of not. So let's preview where we ended up with our comp. All right, and let's check it out. So a really cool initial result. Like, this is basically what we were going for. Some things I'm noticing right away is that the displacement is a little bit crazy. That's not very subtle, but we could actually keyframe this to be less subtle over time. And also, I think everything is a little bit too sharp when it comes to this jet. It's too readable. So we will do two things to combat that. The first is a super cheaty thing to do, which is just to go to my mirror layer, and I'm going to add a radial fast blur. And when I add some radial fast blur, I can choose the center of said radial fast blur. And let me just solo this so you can see what I'm doing. Basically, I'm just adding this kind of blur that is, spreading things out like that. But I'm going to put its center point way over here. And look at that. It's a very graphic, simple, like motion blur kind of effect. I'm not going to have that high. I'm going to do it like, I don't know, that much. And I'll add a keyframe for the center point there, and then go to the end and just kind of move my center to be up here. So the jet's pointing downward now. And like, look at this. That was a really simple way to add some kind of fake motion blur to this, even though, the camera's following it, so it wouldn't be that motion blurred, but I bet it looks better. So let's go ahead and look at that in Super Comp. And yeah, right away, look at that. Now it feels a little bit less like super defined, and you can almost imagine the clouds wrapping and kind of being displaced by this effect. Look how cool that is. Just the addition of Radial Fast Blur happens to really make this whole thing, both the displacement layer and the holdout, really feel more married to those clouds. That might be the most successful these things have ever combined for me, actually. I really like how this turned out. Way to go, everyone. And now one additional thing I think that could also help is that once the plane is through the clouds, there's no real evidence that it did just part through them. So I'm going to add one more instance of particular. I'm going to add a solid, let's say particular, and we'll call this the part trail, or something like that. And for this, I want to do basically the same process as before. I'm going to add a new layer, or a new light rather, just a point light, and I'll call this the parting trail. And then I will connect this right to my mirror geometry and zero it out like that. 0, 0, 0. So now it's right in the middle of my mirror body. I'll also turn it off because I don't need it to be casting lights into the scene, but it'll be right here anyway. We're going to go and add trap code particular. I'm going to close Super Comp because I actually don't think I need it anymore. And then within particular, let's see, I'm going to move it back up top just so I can see what's happening. For these emitters, I'm going to say I want it to be emitting from the lights as well. Right now, by default, it'll try to emit from those two lights I created earlier, and that's because I named them emitter. But if I go here and say choose names, I can say instead of using emitter as the proper prefix, use the word parting as the prefix. And now if I say that, they're all going to emit from this light here in the center. And now I just have the simple job of making some particles. I want a few more, actually, of them. I want a bunch. And I want their emitter size to be not 500, but probably more like this, about as big as the jet body is. I'd like the size of these particles to be very random, but overall a little bit bigger, so there's sort of a little, smoky like this. I'm going to have their opacity be random like this. I'm going to turn on their motion blur as well. Let's see, that would be under rendering, motion blur. We'll turn it on. And we'll also add some wind like we did to the other ones, which is under fast physics. We'll call that the drift. We'll make it negative. And we're going to actually have these ones over time, we'll have them change their appearance. So the first one, over time, let's have it start big, end small. If we make the life of these particles even less dramatic, you'll see them get smaller even within frame right here. We can do the same thing for their opacity. Let's go to their opacity over life, and we'll use this preset where they fade in right at the beginning and then fade out by the end. So you can see that I'm creating these really blobby, simple particles coming off of the back of the jet like this. I'm going to make them a little bit bigger just so they're kind of like a big cloudy holdout that is accompanying this jet. And I don't actually want to have this set of particles really render at all anywhere. I'm going to turn it off. And then just like we did before with this jet and this foreground cloud layer, I'm going to use the set matte effect again. Now, you can use as many of these on the same layer as you want. So I'm going to duplicate the set matte effect, but instead of mirrors effects and masks, I wanted to use particulars part trail effects and masks. And you'll remember, since we had checked invert earlier, it's going to punch out anything that is part of our particular trail behind it. If I want, I'm going to go to the light emitter and maybe actually move it back up a little bit closer to the front of the plane. Yeah, like that, so it's more thick coming right off of the back there. And let's go ahead and preview this new effect where there's a holdout behind the jet also, and the motion blur of the jet combined. I know waiting for the RAM preview is everyone's favorite part. And look how great everything is combining together. Like, it really feels like that jet is interacting with these clouds, even though it's really just a bit of displacement and some particles being generated as a holdout right behind it. But the motion of them all combines together to make this really cool, invisible jet look. And speaking of looks, hopefully you are familiar with Magic Bullet looks, which is going to be my last step in this process. I'm going to add an adjustment layer with Magic Bullet looks, which is also available in Cinema 4D now. So when I add Magic Bullet looks, I can jump into edit, and now you can jump through and just like hover over dozens of different looks that transform the entire appearance of what this shot looks like. So like we got, Hashi version here and Zack Snyder version right there. You just have to add like 4 hours to this render, and then you got that. But like, look, you just select any look that adds some cool diffusion or a really nighttimey look, or you could push it stylized if you really want, do something crazy cool. Look, black and white. Anyway, hopefully you are familiar with looks. It is an industry standard way to transform the look of your shot in seconds. And there you have it, a Wonder Woman invisible jet shot that works all within After Effects, but is utilizing some Cinema 4D files as well as a 3D controller within After Effects. A lot of fun, and I think this came together really nicely. There's obviously dozens of more things you could do if you wanted to spend more than, an hour on a shot like this, but yeah, I always find it really fun when something can come together quickly like this. So thank you all for joining me. This has been a lot of fun.